It's machlokas in the Rishon whether the Mishnah is talking about Chol Moed or about everything. And that actually makes a real difference whether the Mishnah is applied to. But the Mishnah says, "Ein korin ve'en cholzim ve'en mavim el krov shameis." Korin means doing kriya. Cholzim was they would bare one shoulder. We don't do this anymore, but they would uncover one shoulder like they take the toga down. And mavrin was the sudas havra, where they would the first meal after levaya. Except who does this? Who are the only people who do this? The krovim, the relatives of the mace, right? And that's the machlokas, and Tosas in the Chaf and Aleph quotes the Shitos, whether this means on Chol Moed. And in Chol Moed, no one can do this except the krovim shel mace, right? But because Chol Moed is Chol Moed, so even if you want to do kriya, you shouldn't do kriya. Even if you wanted to show avelis, you shouldn't do avelis. However, at the levaya, the krovim are allowed to do this. Or does it mean every day of the year? The only people who do this are the people of the Avelim, but the other people don't join in, and so forth. So that's two interpretations, or maybe it's both together. And then the Mishnah said at the end, "V'in mavrin ela amita zakufa." When they do the Suda Savra, they only do it when the seat is set up properly. So we pointed out they had this. They would turn the beds upside down. The beds were like it seemed to be a multi-purpose kind of thing. It was a bed. It served as a sofa, a couch. They ate on it, right? Like we know in Pesach, we reclined because they used to recline on these Roman couches. So that it was a whole different contraption. And for Avelis, it was turned upside down. The bed is a sign of procreation. It's a dual purpose, so it's a sign of eating. You ate there, but the Suda Savra was done in a way when they sat normally.
They eat there and they procreated there? Is that what you said?
I'm saying it appears to have had
multi... I'm going to ask the question. Where you eat is where Mizbeah.
No. Maybe they moved it around.
It's a culture, but you know what I'm saying.
So the houses themselves, Archie, were very small.
No, sorry.
Okay, so I'm saying
one would expect that it's called a divan, D-I-V-A-N.
Okay.
Rather than a bed.
Right.
Okay.
Right?
Sorry.
Well, I mean, the whole reason why it's so hard for us because we don't have this. Our beds are serious beds, and our seats are serious seats, and we sit at tables. So we don't even sit like they did in the days of the Gemara, which was more of a reclining position without a table. They had like these TV tables where they would eat off of. Little contraptions. So the same way that you can imagine a chaise lounge which doubles as a chair, right? And it's a place you can have a snooze. So the same thing, they had this kind of contraption that probably could be moved around and so forth. But the bottom line is, once again, there's going to be the two interpretations. Does this refer to Chol Moed? And Chol Moed, when you're doing the Suda Savra, you sit on the regular bed, but otherwise you could sit when it's normal. Suda Savra, you normally sit on the bed when it's turned upside down. Or it means all the time, when the Avelim come back, before they turn the bed over, they have the Suda Savra when the bed is set up its normal position, or the seat is in its normal position. Okay, so this discussion about doing Kriya, and the only people who do Kriya are the Avelim, is what the Gemara had begun to talk about last time. And the Gemara said that there are times we do Kriya even on other people. So the Gemara talked about doing it for a Chacham, for a Talmud Chacham, and they're all like, everybody's like a car of a Talmud Chacham, right? Talmud Chacham, I mean, I don't think many people did it, but a person, when we say Talmud Chacham, means someone like Rav Lichtenstein, someone who's really accepted all around. And I imagine people in the yeshiva, his students, would have done this as well. I mean, we're so far removed, we don't. And then we talked about, what about Adam Kosher? Adam Kosher is a regular person who keeps all the mitzvahs. He's not a big Talmud Chacham. So the Gemara said that's only if you're there b'shas yitzias neshama. And then the Gemara said that if you're present when b'shas yitzias neshama, then a person has to do kriya. And that's the last thing we did. Maybe we just go back a couple lines. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer ha'omed al meis b'shas yitzias neshama chayv lekroa. When a person's there at the time when the person passed away, you should do kriya. Must do kriya. Lamaz adomer, what's comparable to the Sefer Torah shenifsraf, a Sefer Torah that's burned, shechayv lekroa, that you have to do kriya. By the way, there's no real source about dropping a Sefer Torah and fasting.
No?
I don't think so. It really comes, the idea of dropping a Sefer Torah is really based upon the fact that you see a Sefer Torah is burned, and here it's even talking about doing Kriya. So you see that's a sense of sadness, of mourning. How do you do it? How do you do it? Right? Isn't
halacha with the Sefer Torah?
Yeah, we do it. But I'm saying if you really look for sources where it comes from, right? Okay.
This Kriya that they did, like that Korim and Mishtachvim?
No.
Kriya.
Oh, that Kriya.
Korim Mishtachvim with a chaf. The round one. This is Kriya.
Yeah.
Okay. So we pointed out that, by the way, that there is a that if you're there and you're not a Karov, actually it's a machlokas whether we do it today. Rav Moshe Feinstein says you do. Others say we don't do it anymore. Even if you do, even if you were to do it, you would you do it at the edge of the garment. Right? It's one of these things that has fallen into disuse. Most of the time, most people who are present when people pass away are people who are present on a frequent basis. So the concern is if they have to do Kriya, they may not come to attend the person at the moment of death. By the way, if you want to read the best, hard to say the word best, one of the most interesting records of a person passing away is the beginning of Gesher HaChaim. And it's been translated. That part of Gesher HaChaim, the Gesher HaChaim has three parts. The last part is all about the afterworld and all this kind of stuff.
What is that book?
Gesher HaChaim is a book about the laws of death and dying.
Okay.
It's written by Rabbi Kaczynski at the beginning of the century, beginning of last century, and it's really Minhag Yerushalayim. So some of the Minhag Yerushalayim are not always accepted around the world, but it's very well accepted as a sefer. It's a big Talmud Chacham. And the third chelik is really about, I said, not the laws, but the spirituality part of this, the machshava and the Jewish thought parts of it. The first two chalakim are really about halachas. In the introduction, it talks about his last day. Okay, the last day of the author, and how he lived his very last day. Okay, I'll have to look it up.
But how did he know it's his last day?
He knew. You know what?
I don't mean to have him, he was ill, or he just knew.
He was. It's slowly, and the key to it is he knows it's the last day, and he has to be prepared for this last day. So here's a person who writes the law, one of the authoritative books in the laws of Avelis, death and mourning and death. Right? He understood exactly what to do and how he carries it out, and it talks about the people who are there at the moment when he dies. So I'm saying it's not to read it in Hebrew. It's very hard to go through. It's been translated because when they translated the last part, the part about the laws hasn't been translated, but the last part which talks about the spirituality part of death and dying and the afterworld and all that has been, and the translator also translated the introduction to the book, which is really about that last day. So I'm going to have to remember to try to find it and copy it, and maybe I'll give it to you. It's fascinating because he really understands what's going on, and they see things, they understand things, and it was recorded at line by line, hour by hour.
You recorded? Someone else recorded?
Someone else recorded. Someone else is recording, and you see the day goes through hour by hour, not hour by hour, part day,
yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Okay. Right.
How do you spell his last name?
Tuckinsky. Tuckinsky. I think I misspelled that, didn't I?
Did he write anything else? The name's very familiar.
Did he write anything else? I don't know.
The name's very familiar.
He was like one of the chief rabbis, one of the leading rabbis in the 20th. Right, correct.
The name's very familiar.
You cannot study 20th century Jewish Tshuvot in Israel without studying his works.
Maybe that's what
he wrote. He wrote a whole thing about Shulchan Aruch HaAsid, what's going to be when time Mashiach comes. He was a very prolific writer. Did you find him?
Oh, the International Dateline.
He wrote about the International Dateline, correct. He's quoted in there. He had a different sheet though, right? That's correct.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying he's a very halachic, well-respected, but on a very simplistic level, if you wanted to look at and 3 or 4 key books in the laws of Avelis, that would be one that would be recommended.
Gesher HaChaim is always quoted in the Art Scroll.
Correct, right, in the Art Scroll on Avelis.
Yes.
That's correct, right. Correct. So I'm going to try to make myself a mental note to kind of look for the translation. It's very, very forceful. Okay. At any rate, but if you're there when a person passes away, you have to do kriya. And so the Gemara says, well, the reason that the brisa that we had quoted, I'm just finishing up what we did last time, that you don't do kriya is because you weren't there b'shas yitzias neshama. Okay, in other words, you see a couple of things here from this Gemara that we did last week. A, if you're present when a person passed away, you should do kriya. Second of all, there was a concept of doing kriya for a Talmud Chacham. A student who learned from a Talmud Chacham, even though it wasn't a direct blood relative, right? Nonetheless, he's supposed to do kriya. Is this on, Rashi? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Record, yeah.
So now the Gemara says like this. Kinoach nafshei the Rav Safra. So there are a bunch of stories about people who pass away, and the stories become somewhat extended. So this is like a story time piece of Gemara. Okay? Kinoach nafshei the Rav Safra lo kar rabban ilavei. The rabbis didn't do kriya. Okay? So Amrei, they said, lo garmina minei. I said we didn't learn directly from him. He wasn't our direct teacher. We didn't sit in front of him. He didn't teach us. So therefore, even though he was a great scholar, a great Talmud Chacham, we don't do kriya for him. So Amalu Abai said, Mi Tanya Harav Shemes. Does it say the teacher who died? Chacham Shemes. So the brisa we had done last week said Chacham Shemes Hakol Krovim, all alike being Krovim to him. Like a Korov has to do kriya, everybody has to do a kriya. So Chacham Shemes Tanya. V'yod, another thing said Abaye, Kol Yoma Shmaita Pumein B'Bei Medrasha. So every day his teachings, Shmaitas, his Shmuot, his learnings are in our mouths in the Beis Medrash. So those every day, if he's not here, we're not in front of him, we're learning his writings, we're learning his statements. He's teaching us we're learning directly from him or indirectly from him. So the Gemara said, so they didn't do kriyat. So Abai says, like, you should have, right? We're learning from him. So Savar Maida Hava Hava. So the rabbi said thought to Abai, well, it's too late. Time has passed. We can't rectify it. We heard about the Shmuel, we heard he died. They weren't at the funeral. Or maybe they were at the funeral. They said we should have done kriya at the very beginning. We didn't. So it's too late. It's gone. The moment has passed. Amalu Abai. So Abai said Tanina. Why? Because we had learned that you do kriya only at the time of passion. Only at the time that you hear it, you feel passionately about it. That's why we do kriya either at the time when a person passes, or most of the time today, when do people do kriya? Right at the beginning of the levaya, right before they spade them, because that's when a person, all the emotions are pent up, right? But for example, if you didn't do kriya for some reason and you came after the funeral, probably would not do the kriya then. You missed the opportunity. Okay, so you have to feel it. So
what if you don't feel it?
So the answer is you feel it even though you don't feel it. Chazal understood certain times they formalize all halachas based upon what most people feel. If you're not an emotional person, you're still feeling it. It's called batla daite kol adam. Your dat, your opinions and your feelings are nullified or subsumed under everybody. So they took a random poll of how many people, when people feel emotions. It's usually right at the beginning. The reason, by the way, the reason we do kriya then is because the rabbis were concerned you wouldn't do kriya properly. All kinds of laws. You have to do it on top. You got to go through the collar and so forth. Got to go down. So therefore, it's done when the rabbi, before he does the levaya, he does kriya with the avelim lebach. So Abai, so they thought it was too late. So Abai goes back to him and says, Tanina, we have a brayse that says, Kol Chacham, Kol Zman she'oskim behesped, chayavim lekroa. As long as they're giving hespedim for the Chacham, they're giving eulogies, you can still do kriya. Because every time they gave a eulogy, what happened? People began to cry again. And the eulogies, the hespedim, back in the day of the Gemara, and the Mishnah, were much different than our hespedim. They were meant to be real tearjerkers. We will have examples of a number of hespedim on Chaf Hamad Bet and Chaf Av Mad Aleph. They're almost like written like dirges. Like if you think about Eicha, say an Eicha is written like in semi-poetry. That is the kind of thing that's a hesped. So they had special people who they would call in. This was their parnasa. That they gave professional hespedim. They didn't say the same thing every time. You had to be creative. But it wasn't simply like today where you call up a relative and a child, right, to read words of eulogy. They were really meant to evoke emotions about the people. So Chacham, as long as you're still giving the eulogies, every time someone else got up to give one, and with the Chacham, because his reputation was so widespread, there were multiple eulogies, right? So then, said Abai, you can still do kriya because it's still the height of emotion.
Did they have women that went around with crying or something?
They were Mekonanot who were professional criers, and they were the support staff, right? They were metapcho. They would bang tambourines and other things. It was like, sounds like a little bit like a New Orleans kind of funeral, but it was very, very, very raw and emotional.
It wasn't like it was just like it was poetry, not poetry, but sort of like almost like you have like a batchan and a chassan. I don't mean to say.
Right. That's right.
Yeah,
like you get up and you say like the clouds got dark and the sea dried up and the wind stopped.
Yes, I mean,
those kind of things, and you understand what the implications are. The person's passed away, and those kind of things, or the big cedar is gone, and all are left are the little saplings or the little fledglings.
Yeah.
So these are the kind, and once again you will see a number of these real life stories of Maspid and what they used to say. And you'll see how different our process is. Look, people sit down. They go to Steele's Memorial. They go to Benjamin's. They sit down. It's like going to theater. Right? It is emotional.
How did they do it in the olden days?
I don't think they sat down. There was no such thing as a funeral chapel.
They stood outside.
They stood around.
At the grave.
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever it was, but they didn't have it. There was no such thing as professional funeral undertakers until North America, until they came to the United States and Canada, or the Western world. This is a new profession. It never existed. In Europe, it did not. Maybe modern Europe, maybe in the big cities, but in the Shtetloch, the Chevra Kadisha was a Chevra Kadisha.
Same in South Africa. There's no such thing as a funeral home.
That's the way it was.
Right.
No,
Chevra Kadisha does everything, I imagine.
So what do you do? So where do you it's at the grave site.
And that's the last thing you have to do, because they come, they take the bed, they sit, they take everything, but you pay whatever you want.
And as bathing are done at the graveside.
And they have what they call a tahara house. And so as you go onto the cemetery, there's a building.
Right, they do that in Eretz Yisrael too.
Yeah, entrance and exit. And you come in, and everybody stands on both sides, and they bring the mace through, and then
they say Hespedim.
But there's the concept of a professional undertaker who makes.
Also at the graveside. I've seen it on the graveside as well.
Okay, but what I'm saying is the profession of an undertaker, right? Who makes all the arrangements, who you come to see and you sit and he shows you around and this. It's a very modern North American custom. It's kind of wants to remove us from death, right? And if you've been there, you understand that. They try to keep death away from you, right? And their job is to try to sell. Their job is to try to sell services that you don't really need.
Correct.
It's like going into any store where the salesman tries to sell you a suit that's of a higher quality or a furniture piece that you don't really need, right? And people are very, very vulnerable, very vulnerable. So I'm saying I don't want to make this sound really bad because they play a very important role. But Lamaisa and the Chevra Kadisha, and they're very cooperative with Chevra Kadishas, right? They have their own Chevra Kadisha, and Chevra Kadisha and shuls go in, correct? But at the same time, the whole idea that this is now we have two. We have of course Steele's, which is a community based, right? It's a non-profit, and then you have Benjamin.
It gives back a lot of money.
Correct. So that's it's non-profit. It's community based. You have Benjamin's, which is a private business.
Oh, it is. I have no idea.
Benjamin's a private business, like a business, like any business. They're both very respectful and so forth. And Benjamin wants to be good because it's his private business, but it's still an undertaker.
Isn't Benjamin's usually for not so firm?
Yes. More than the other one, correct? Right? Because the model of Steele's Memorial is a community thing. And the model of Benjamin's is a private one, correct? But there are crossovers.
Okay. So, Rabbi, where would they keep the body in the old days if they didn't have a chapel? Where would they keep?
They didn't keep it anywhere. They buried it.
No, but let's say
the house.
Keep it in the house. Keep it in the house.
Stay in the house.
Keep it in the house. We learned the other day what happens to a person. He wants to eat, and the body is there.
But the Tahara.
So remember they said. Remember the Gemara said. The Bryson said. He said you go to a different house. What if you don't have another house to go to? You go to your friend's house. What if you don't have another friend's house to go to? You go to another room. Another room, you put up a mechitza. Right? If you don't have a mechitza, then you turn your back. You should at least be facing him.
It's a good question.
I'll tell you
so what did they do to Tahara? They did Tahara and then they brought him back to the house?
They probably did the Tahara in the house.
In the house they probably did.
My grandfather was Shulam when he died. I was in the apartment. He was downstairs. And I heard I was a kid still. I was 10 years old.
he called it prayer according to my mother. He says, makes the round bring the Chavagidisha. That moment he said, Shema Yisrael, and he passed away.
Wow.
He actually said, bring in the Chavagidisha.
Wow.
And I heard the Shema Yisrael two apartments.
Wow.
It was that loud. It was that loud.
What did he die from?
Heart failure.
Maybe he didn't feel well or something.
Yeah.
No, he knew. He knew as he was dying. Everything was dying until the last, breath.
So I said I will try to remember to copy the English part, introduction to Gesher Chaim, which talks about that last day of Rabbi Chil Michal Tuchatzinski, which you really see it.
Who was that?
He's the author of the Gesher Chaim, but in the introduction to his book, they have his last day. It's called The Last Day. And he's a person he wrote one authoritative books, and this is a book about his actual last day.
He knew it was going to be his last day?
Yeah, I'll show it to you. I'll bring it to you. I'll show it to you. Copy it. So at any rate, so Abai says, well, as long as doing a speidim, you have to do kriya. So I'm still in the story. Several of the mikvah altar. So the rabbis, when the Abai said you guys can still do kriya, want to do kriya right away. So Amalu Abai. So Abai said, Tanya chacham kvodo bespeido. The real covered for a chacham is when they do the hesped. So you got to wait. It means you got to wait for the start of the next hesped. Like you don't walk in the middle of an act. So when you go, don't do kriya now. Wait for the next hesped to begin. I guess what he was saying, they did hesped, they wait a little bit. Don't do it now. Wait for the next hesped to begin. That's when you're going to do kriya, and that's how the story ends. Okay.
Do it at the beginning of the hesped.
Beginning of the hesped. As long as they're still giving hesped, then you can still do the kriya. So you see, this is a story about Rasafra. It's a very powerful story you'll see compared to the next stories, where they didn't do kriya because they thought they did not learn directly from him. By correcting them, say no, we learn his teachings, and therefore we do kriya. And therefore, as long as they were doing hesped, them at the beginning of the next hesped, they did kriya. Okay, now we come to the next story. The next story is a little longer. It's actually a lot longer. Kinoach nafshi de Rav Huna. When Rav Huna died, they wanted to put a Sefer Torah. They thought to put a Sefer Torah. Puraya is his bed. And Puraya by the same root as Pruravu. In this case, it doesn't mean the bed he slept on. It means the stretcher. Okay.
They want to put the Torah where?
They wanted to put the Torah on. The body is lying. They wanted to show that here is the individual who lived the Torah, who was the man of Torah.
Is that disrespectful to the Torah?
Correct. So we're going to see that.
Yeah.
But these are exceptional people. They didn't do it for any run-of-the-mill person. They thought this would be an appropriate way to say he learned what's in here, right? The big covenant. It's like saying you normally don't bring a body into a shul, right? Even if they use the shul for a funeral, the body stays outside. The only time you bring the body in is rabbi of the shul, maybe the shamus of the shul, someone who really lives in the shul, big Talmud Chacham. Then you can bring the mace into the basic Knesset, the basic Knesset room where the Aron Kodesh is. So you say you can't bring it in. The answer is for a person of Talmud Chacham, it's a cover. So they thought the cover for him would be to put the Sefer Torah on him. Okay. Think about it for a moment. I know you don't sit with this. You don't put a Sefer Torah on you, but when you sit with a Sefer Torah, is it kavod? I mean, it is kavod.
Well, somebody has to hold it.
Correct. But when you're holding it, you're holding it on your knees or on your thigh.
You brought it in there.
Okay, I'm saying, but you're saying, so holding a Sefer Torah, putting a Sefer Torah next to you, is a sign of kavod. So they thought to do the same thing for Rav Huna, even though he was deceased and lying prone on this stretcher, this poraya. So that's what they thought to do, but they didn't. You'll see. So Amalu Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda, who is a younger contemporary, said, a younger contemporary Rav Huna, Milsa de B'chaye lo svirale hashta leikum le le'avidle, something that he didn't want to do when he was alive. He didn't want to be on a Sefer Torah, the same level as a Sefer Torah. You see in a moment, I'll tell you the story. So now that he's dead, you're going to put a Sefer Torah together with him. Maybe the Sefer Torah wasn't going to be on top of him. Maybe the Sefer Torah they wanted to put on the same stretcher. Here's the body, here's the Sefer Torah. It makes more sense, right? But alongside him, right, side by side, that makes more sense than putting on top of him. So, but you'll see from the following story that he didn't want to sit on the same level as the Sefer Torah. You and I would say the same thing, right? If you was a bench, There was a bench and the Sefer Torah sitting lying on a bench. You're going to sit on the bench? You right away feel viscerally there's something wrong. So here's the case that happened. The Rav Tachlifa told the following story. Ano as a Rav Tachlifa saying, I, Chazise, saw Rav Huna, the boy Lemesiv Apuraya, he wanted to sit on a poraya, in this case means like a bed. The same poraya is like the mita. So he wanted to sit on some kind of bench. V'havemanach Sefer Torah Ilaye, and there was a Sefer Torah on the bench, lying. Right? They put it there for safekeeping. Remember that Sifrei Torah in those days were much more commonly used than today.
That's what they had,
because if you want to learn Chumash or Tanakh, you pulled out a scroll. So think of the comparability of finding a Chumash on a bench. You also shouldn't sit on the bench. Right? You would take it off the bench and sit down. So he came, the Sefer Torah is there on this bench. The Kav Kaje Ahara, he took a jug and put it on the ground, he put it like upside down. The Yosef Sefer Torah Ilaya, and he put the Sefer Torah on the jug, on the barrel. It's actually a jug, a large jug, that with the Sefer Torah wouldn't be on this bench that he wanted to sit on. Well, the same thing. You come and you sit. You got a bench. There's this chumash on the bench. You pick it up. What do you put? You put it on the table. That's the same thing. But you see that Rav Huna. This is Rav Tachlifa telling the story about Rav Huna when he was alive. That Rav Huna himself didn't want to be on the same level as the Sefer Torah. He didn't want to be sitting on the same bench as Sefer Torah that he was on. So Alma Kasavar Asa Leishev Agabimita Shesefer Torah Munach Alea. So you see that he held you can't sit on a bed or a bench that a Sefer Torah is lying on. And that, by the way, makes sense. Ergo, he's dead. When he was alive, you didn't want to do this. Now that he's dead, you want to do it to him? It's a rhetorical question. So Rav Chisda says, don't do it. And they don't do it. That's how the funeral gets going. Okay? Now, the body is inside. And they want to take him outside. Because the person passed away, they did the tara, they prepared him, they put him on the bier to carry him out, and they got a problem getting him out the door. Okay? So the Gemara tells us that Lohavi Nafek Puraya Mi Baba. So the bed couldn't get out because of the gate. In other words, the doorway was too narrow. He's got this, however you want to imagine, however this bier is. Remember, it was wide enough that a person could be lying on it, as well as a Sefer Torah. They get to the door, they don't know what to do, or the doorway, because the bava, the shar, is too wide. So savar l'shal shulei derech ganim. So they thought to put him outside through the yard. In other words, send him out the window. They couldn't get out the door, and the door was probably narrow. It's not that he was a wide girth. We don't know that Rav Huna was such a wide guy. But so they figured they can't get him out the door. He died in this room. They did the tar. They want to get him out. So they'll send him out the back door, the back of the window, not through the door. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amalu Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is there once again. He said the same thing before, but not to put the Sefer Torah. Hagamir namine chacham kvoda derech Pesach. The honor for a chacham is he goes out the front door. In other words, you can send a nobody out the back window, but that's just not proper respect. It's got to go out the front door, right? It's the procession for the Levaya. So then they had another choice. So they wanted to put him onto a more narrow bed. Remember, the bed he was on had room for a Sefer Torah, so it was obviously a wide kind of bed. Right? It may have been, by the way, they may have used beds that were multi-purpose. It may not have been like we think of this as a stretcher, which is only used for a Levaya.
A double bed.
Okay, maybe a bed and a half. Okay, a bed.
No, we can have a double bed.
Good. But I'm saying, because you see the story, you got room for the body, room for the Sefer Torah. Now where the Sefer Torah is, so they said, okay, let's move him on to another bed. Get him a different, a more narrow version. And that's what they're going to do. So once again, Rav Chisda pipes up. Amalu Rav Chisda says, Hachi kamir namine. This is what I learned from him. Chacham kvodo b'mita rishona. The cover for a chacham is the bed he's lying on. You take him out on. To start, what does that mean? It means to start moving around from bed to bed means you're disturbing the mace. So wherever he is, that's how you got to make it work. So once again, they're stuck. They can't take him out the back window. They can't get through the front door, and they can't change the bed. So the Rav Yehuda, and he proves it. The Rav Yehuda, how do you know that the covered for a chacham is with the first bed, the original bed he's on? Shenemar So I'll tell you what. Let me read the pasuk and I'll tell you what the case is talking about. By Yakivos Aron Holakim El Agola Chadasha. So this is when the Aron Habris was captured by the Plishtim. The Plishtim captured it, and it stayed in there with the Plishtim, I forget how many years. Eventually it comes back to Bnei Yisrael. The Plishtim have all kinds of plagues and terrible things. And they finally realized that until they stole the ark, everything was fine. What do? They put it on top of a wagon with a set of cattle, a set of oxen, and they let it go. Right? And it goes back to Bnei Yisrael. And it wanders back, and the Bnei Yisrael get the ox and the wagon. Later, when David wants to transport this, right, we're up to the point of David now. So the pasuk says the pasuk that I just read is they put the ark of God. They have it right. Al Agola Chadasha. So Agola Chadasha, they interpret not a new wagon, but the new wagon, the wagon that it was, the same wagon. So Agola Chadasha means the new wagon that it came back in. So Chazal and the Mefarshim understand this to be the very same wagon is what David HaMelech sets it up. It looks like it's a new wagon, but the traditional interpretation is the very same wagon. So the Gemara says when they took the Aron Habris, it was the Plishtim put it on one wagon, and when David wanted to transport it, he kept it the same wagon. You see that the true kavod for the Aron was keeping on the same wagon. So true kavod for Talmud Chacham is keeping him on the same beer. Okay. Some of the Rishonim raised the question that the Tanakh tells us when the wagon came back with the Aron, so they slaughtered the oxen as they were so happy to get back the Aron Habris. So they took the oxen, they killed them, they brought them as Bech, it says in Tanakh, and they took the wood from the wagon.
Isn't Shmuel?
Yeah. And they take the wood from the wagon, they take to burn the oxen for the carbon.
Yeah.
So the obvious question is, how did they have the wagon? How could this be the original wagon if the original wagon was burnt? And they try to suggest as follows. They try to suggest, first of all, maybe a drash, but they try to suggest that they may have burnt the boards for the wagon, but the actual chassis was kept. The actual wagon itself remained, but the boards that surrounded the ark, or the support for the ark, were used. So David HaMelech then wants to recycle and use the original chassis, even though he must use new boards. Okay, so that's how they try to get away with trying to reconcile this drash with the reality of what happens in Sefer Shmuel Bet.
But when you do korban, you can't use an ox, you have to use a bull.
So it's not really a carbon; it's an ad hoc kind of carbon. This is when there's no base of mikdash. It's like bringing on a bama.
So you can still,
yeah, but sure you can use an ox.
But ox is being castrated.
Okay, it's a bull. Okay, it's a bull. Right.
I think an ox is a castrated.
Correct. So it wasn't an ox. Maybe it was a real cow. Okay. Right.
Okay, I don't know. Okay.
At any rate, so they applied this here to the case of Rav Huna, that they shouldn't change the beer that he was on. So what did they do? So let's go back to the story. So Paras Baba Vavkua. So they broke the gate, and they broke the doorway, and they took him out the doorway. So this is a memorable event of how the funeral for Rav Huna began.
They broke the doorway.
They broke the doorway to get him out. No, you can just imagine sitting here trying to go back and forth. What are we going to do? But it stands out in people's memories. Sorry.
To the nth degree of covered.
Correct. The covered required that they needed to break the doorway and then rebuild it later in order to give the proper cover to Rav Huna. Right? Probably not the kind of conclusion we would have reached. Right? Probably the mess, the dust, but I guess our construction is different. Okay. Now, so this is the preamble. Now the actual Levaya. Pasach alei Rav Abba. So now they start giving Hespedim, right? They want to bury him. They want to begin the procession. So Rav Abba gives the first Hesped, and they'll give us part of it. Roy hoya Rabbeinu shetishra of Shechina el shebavel garmalei. Okay, actually, maybe it's not a Hesped, maybe it's a preamble to a Hesped. He said, really, Rav Huna should have had Ruach HaKodesh, should have had the Shechina, But he was in Bavel, and in Bavel you can't get ruach, you can't get nevuah, and he should have had nevuah, but we lived in Bavel. In other words, they're saying he was such a great spiritual person. Had he lived in Eretz Yisrael during the time of Tanakh, he would have been like a Navi. He would have been of that level. That's how he opens it. It's obviously hyperbole, but it's meant to kind of open the feelings that they had about Rav Huna, who was not only a great Talmud Chacham, but also a great spiritual level, a person who therefore should have had this clairvoyance, but unfortunately he was in the wrong place. He was in Bavel. The Gemara then digresses from the funeral, and the Gemara says, Masi Rav Nachman bar Chisda, v'amile Rav Chanan bar Chisda. So they ask a question on the statement that you're in Bavel, you can't become a Navi. So the Gemara says, Hayo Dvar Shemel Yecheskel ben Buzia Kohen Beretz Kasdim. This is the opening line in the prophet Ezekiel. Where does Yecheskel live? Yecheskel lives in Eretz Kasdim in Bavel, and Yecheskel 1 opens up. There's the famous vision of the Chashmal, right? All these angels and so forth, right? And it opens up. Where is Yecheskel when this happens? He is in Eretz Kasdim. He's on the Har Kvar. We know exactly where he's not in Eretz Yisrael. You see that Yecheskel is in Bavel, and guess what? He's a super Navi, right? He's a great Navi. His Nevuah is recorded. So how could he become a Navi if he lived in Bavel? We just said that Rav Huna would have been a Navi, but he lived in Bavel. So if Bavel can't be a Navi, how could Yecheskel do it? How could Yecheskel beat the odds? So the Gemara says, that's a good question. So it's not clear that this is part of the funeral. This may be like a sidebar. So Tafach le Avua besandle. So the father of either Nachman bar Chisda or Rav Chanan bar Chisda, the father is Rav Chisda, knocks him with his sandal. So in other words, gives him a knock, right? So it's not clear what this means. This is only like saying he's stupid, or is this actually taking place at the funeral? And you know, when you're at a place where everybody's quiet, you want to kind of speak to your friend, what do? You give him a nudge. So they were asking the question amongst themselves when this guy was giving the hesped. So he couldn't yell back at them and tell them they're wrong. He kind of just took his shoe and hit them there to kind of get their attention. So Amalei, so Rav Chisda said to them, would be the same Rav Chisda who's there present. He doesn't want to disturb the eulogy of Rav Abba. He says, Amalei lava minalach. Didn't I tell you already? Lo tirtod alma. That you shouldn't be bothered by this. Ma haya shahaya kvar. What was already was. The answer to why Yecheskel was a Navi, it means what was. It ain't going to happen again. There are actually two interpretations. One interpretation of what Rav Chisda answers to his sons is either that was the time of Yecheskel, and there's a different time. No, yeah, you're right. Yecheskel could be a Navi outside in Bavel. But now, today, hundreds of years later, it's not possible to be a Navi anywhere except Eretz Yisrael, or have Ruach HaKodesh except Eretz Yisrael. So that was what was, it ain't going to happen again. The other interpretation about this line is, you may have heard this, that Yecheskel was a Navi before he came to Bavel. If you started being a Navi in Eretz Yisrael, you can continue. You don't relinquish your Nevuah when you leave Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And in fact, Yecheskel is the exception to the Nevi'im. Nevi'im were all in Eretz Yisrael, except, right? The exception, really, there are two exceptions. One exception is Yecheskel. The other exception is Yonah, right? Yonah, in fact, the story of Yonah, some of the Rishonim tried to understand the reason that Yonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, because he didn't want to leave Eretz Yisrael where he could be a Navi. So God tells him you got to go to Nineveh. So it's like a contradiction. You're going to go to Nineveh and be a Navi even though you normally can't.
But he went out on the sea.
I'm sorry?
But he went out on the sea.
So the sea, right, and that's exactly what. So he wanted to go to the sea to go to Tarshish. So maybe Tarshish was like along the coast or something. I don't know. But clearly Yonah is outside of Nineveh is outside of Israel.
So he didn't want to go to Tarshish because
he didn't want to go to Nineveh.
Exactly.
He ran
because he didn't want. He knew they were going to repent, and
the Jews wouldn't repent. Etc., etc. That's also true.
Yeah.
So Yonah is the other exception. The other real exception are the Avos, who we believe have Nevuah and do speak to God, and speak to God even when they're outside of Eretz Yisrael. right? Yaakov is with Lavan for all those years, communicates with God. Daniel is a good example as well. Daniel's not a Navi, by the way. Daniel has Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, Daniel is one of the Ksuvim, he's not one of the Nevi'im. So these things do exist. We think there are people who had Ruach HaKodesh for centuries later as well. So there are some exceptions. By the example about the Avos and by one more very real exception, the biggest exception is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is a Navi his entire life, the greatest Alva Nevi'im, and he never gets Eretz Yisrael. So the argument is that, the rule about being a Navi in Eretz Yisrael is only once you get to Israel. Before they get to Israel, you have to have Nevi'im. So Avram can be a Navi, Yitzchak can be a Navi, Yaakov, Moshe, and so forth, Aaron.
Once you get to Israel, only if you live in Israel.
Once you get to Eretz Yisrael, so then the rules change. That's not such a bad answer. So we have the exception of Yechezkel, we have the exception of Yonah, but all the other Nevi'im live in Eretz Yisrael.
It's like once you do Karbonis in Shiloh, or you can't do Bomas. You can't have Bomas.
Correct.
So same sort of thing.
Things change. So at any rate, so either it means that why was Yechezkel a Navi? Because either he started being a Navi in Israel and he could continue, or it means those was different times and that's why he can't be. So there's a sidebar to the story. So they answered why Yechezkel can be a Navi and Rav Huna could not be a Navi. It means they actually accepted this hesped with seriousness. The funeral procession continues. This is a long story. So first we told about how he had to get out of the house. We read one hesped. They're now transporting Rav Huna from Bavel, where he lived. We know he lives in Bavel because he's works with Rav Chisda, because they just told us that he was in Bavel and that's why he doesn't have the Nevuah. They bring him back to Eretz Yisrael. So this is fascinating. They're transporting him back to Eretz Yisrael. I really don't understand how they took place, because this is a Mid-Eastern climate. It's a long trip, right? Can't imagine what the body was in any state when they arrived there, but this was a minhag that they used. And by the way, you see as difficult as you can imagine to be, there's a concept of bringing the body back to Eretz Yisrael. So it's not just something that comes up right in the Middle Ages. It goes back to stories like this, that Rav Huna, who lives in Bavel, is brought to be buried in Eretz Yisrael.
You didn't have any preserving methods, or they didn't like Yosef was embalmed a little bit.
So it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that,
right? Okay.
You know, it's saying some sort of.
I mean, today when a body is transported, I believe legally they have to do some surface embalming.
They do?
I think so. Minor embalming. I'm not sure.
No.
Okay. All right.
Because it's in cargo, and cargo's.
It's in a bag.
Yeah, but cargo's cold. Cargo is. That's why sometimes when you land, cargo's not heated. Cargo's in the bottom.
There are two cargo compartments. One is pressurized, one is not pressurized. Correct.
Is that there are two?
Yes, there are two.
Well, that's for dogs or animals or something.
You don't want to put the dogs in the non pressurized.
No, but the regular luggage, it's not pressurized and it's cold. Because I remember coming to Israel or whatever, and they opened up my luggage and the shampoo was like ice cold because it was
30,000 feet.
Yeah.
Correct. So they've now gotten to Eretz Yisrael, okay? So they get to Eretz Yisrael, and what are we up to? Okay. When they get there, Amrulei l'Rav Ami l'Ravasi, they tell Rav Ami l'Ravasi, who are in Eretz Yisrael, who used to be in Bavel. Rav Ami Ravasi go back and forth in many cases. They're sometimes called Nechusi. They travel back to Bavel and they bring back the news to Eretz Yisrael. So they were in Bavel, and apparently they didn't like Rav Huna. They didn't get along with Rav Huna. They go back to Eretz Yisrael. So they tell Rav Ami Ravasi, Rav Huna Asi, Rav Huna's coming. Or Rav Huna has come. So they didn't understand what that meant. The news had not yet reached that Rav Huna was dead. So they announced Rav Huna has arrived. So Amr, they said, Ki avinon hasam, when we were in Bavel, lo havilan ledluye reishin minei, we couldn't raise our heads next to him. Whatever we said, he kind of knocked us down intellectually. Hashta asinon hacha. So hashta asinon hacha. Now that we've come here, asa basrein, he's come after us. They kind of felt like he was chasing them. He was hunting them. Like we couldn't hold the candle up to him. Anytime we raised the question, he kind of shot us down. So we left. And now it looks like he's chasing us. What are we going to do? How do we get out of this? How do we save ourselves? So they said, no. Amru, they said, Aron Abba. Okay? his beer came, his aron, the coffin came. Okay, by the way, up to now, an aron, we're no longer up to a mita. So the aron comes. So Rav Ami, Rav Asi, Nafik, they both went out to give homage to the casket of Rav Huna.
They use an aron. In Israel, they just use a shroud.
Correct, but this was transportation, I guess.
So they had to
transporting, they had to do something. Okay. Rav Hila, Rav Chanina, lo nafek. So two other rabbis, Rav Hila and Rav Chanina, did not go out, or some have a different version. He could Amri, Rav Hila nafek, Rav Chanina lo nafek. Rav Hila went out, Rav Chanina. Some people went out to give kavod. Some people did not go out to give kavod. Why not? Why did they go? Some go, why did not? Some others not go. The nafek my time. Why did those who went out go out? The time you have a brisa. The brisa says, Aron ha'aver min makom makom omdim alav b'shura v'yomer alav berachas avelim v'tanchum avelim. When they bring a casket from place to place, everybody goes out to greet it, and they stand in the shura like you do in the cemetery nebuch, and they say berachas avelim, which is a separate bracha that they said in rachova shalir, and they also say amokim menachem eschem. So a separate bracha, they won't really say that often today. So that's why. Why should they go out? Because the brisa says you go out. When a funeral beer goes by, you stop and you give kavod. The lo nafak my time is how come those who the other group didn't go out? So they tell you they have a brisa that said the opposite. Aron hover mi makom l'makom ein omdim b'shura ve'ein omdim l'lav bechas avelim v'tanchum avelim. So they have a brisa that says exactly the opposite. When a aron comes by, you don't go out. You don't give him kavod. So that's why they didn't go. So each one followed the brisa. One brisa says you should, one brisa says you shouldn't. Now it sounds kind of strange. How can you have a brisa that's the same brisa, only one says you do, one says you don't? You always have to reconcile this. The Gemara says kasha dade. The two brises are a question, or a contradiction. So the Gemara says lo kasha kansha shlodo kayemes kan b'shein shlodo kayemes. So the Gemara says it depends. If the body is intact, so shlodo is like the spine. The skeleton is whole. The skeleton is whole and the way it's supposed to be. Then you go out and give it respect. If the skeleton is not, then you don't. Now you say, well who's going to rearrange a skeleton? The answer is, by the time they schlepped this guy all around from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and the body desiccated or deteriorated, you don't know if the body really was considered whole. It was rattling around in the aron. So if the body is still the way it's supposed to be, so then you give it proper kavod. If the body is probably deteriorated that you don't, so you don't. So that's how you explain the two brises. The brisa, therefore, when do you give kavod? If the body is intact. When you don't give kavod, the body is not intact. So what about Rav Huna? So Rav Huna, his body was intact. So why didn't those people go out? Why did some people not go out? They didn't know the proper interpretation of the brisa. They thought the brisa says you don't go out all the time. So what it meant you don't go out when the body was coming apart. That's not covered right. That's the way you want to really get on with the funeral. That makes a whole lot of sense. So that's what the Gemara says. Kash nadad, it's a kash lo kasha, kash shlo the kamas, kash ein shlo the kamas. One is where the skeleton is intact, the spine is intact, and one is where the spine is not intact. Rav Huna shlo the kamas have, and Rav Huna's the body was intact because he was a tzaddik, and therefore tzaddikim, the bodies don't break down. HaKadosh Baruch Hu watches over them, blah blah blah, right? So lo nafek. So why the people didn't go out? Lo simu kamei. They didn't know the end of the interpretation of the brisa, so they didn't go out. Okay. Good. We got time to finish the story. It's a real good story. So they brought him to Eretz Yisrael. They got to bury him somewhere. Where are they going to bury Rav Huna? They don't know. He didn't have a plot. He didn't belong to a chevra, right? So he didn't have reserve karka. So the Gemara said, Amrei hecha ninche. Where are we going to bury? Where are we going to put him? Where's he going to lie? What do we do with him? So the Gemara says, Rav Huna rebates Torah b'Yisrael, Rav Chia rebates Torah b'Yisrael. So they said, well, you know what? Rav Huna taught Torah, or promulgated Torah, and Rav Chia promulgated Torah. Let's bury him in the cave, in the crypt, where Rav Chia is buried. Right? Wherever we buried Rav Chia, they had like a family plot for Rav Chia. We'll put Rav Huna in there as well. Now, the question is whether there's really room for him. So here the story that you're going to read looks a little Kabbalistic. It's really hard to understand exactly what takes place. So they said, okay, we'll bury him in the same crypt with Rav Chia, excuse me. And how did they bury, by the way? How did they bury? So they had this. You've seen like the caves in Eretz Yisrael, right? The caves are really from BAYT Sheni. Probably they're still doing it that way then, where they would bury the body, then they would collect the bones, they put them into different shelves, right?
But according to some that I saw, they would put the bodies out and they would deteriorate and just pick up the bones and put the bones
into a shelf in the cave.
A bone box, a shelf, whatever.
Or a bone box, right? Correct. But what I'm saying is that you have multi areas in the same cave.
Yeah, you've got like shells.
Shells, correct.
Some of the shells I saw in they're very tiny. They're just for bones.
Correct.
They're just.
Right. Agreed. Okay. So, but you still have to have a place to put them.
What about the monument?
So the monument today is only for us because we bury in the ground. You know, people wouldn't know where people are buried. The Kohanim would become tamei. If you have a cave, you knew the cave was for burial. There were burial caves.
You must have a name on each.
Right. Or there was a way to mark them. They marked them with lime.
We learned about that where they painted white.
Right, they painted them white, but they painted white. We talked about
olive stones.
Right, they painted stones. There was about in Moed because it talked about painting and it talked about shvius, right? So they buried. We find different ways of burying in different places. But you see, the case we're talking about now is someone has to bring a body into a crypt. In other words, it's not like we're going to dig a grave and bury Rav Huna in the ground. We're going to read the story right now. Someone has to bring him in. Where they're bringing him into? They're bringing him into some kind of cave, some kind of subterranean chamber, where they're going to find a place to bury Rav Huna next to Rav Chia. This sounds like morbid, but this is how the story progresses. Remember, he dies in Bavel. They have to get him out of the house. They give his him. He can't have because he's in Bavel. They schlep him all the way to Eretz Yisrael. A period of time has transversed. They reach Eretz Yisrael. They get to the community. The community says, "What do we do with him? We got to find a proper coveted burial place for him. Where are we going to bury him? Like saying, put him on Har Zayt, the Mount of Olives, or something."
You said nobody bought karka. There's no karka.
Correct. Nobody had karka. There was no such concept. They found a place to bury him. Okay. And Rav Huna, because he was a great tzaddik, right? And by the way, the message of all of this, by the way, is that where people are buried, their neighbors have significance. Neighbors, where you're buried, right? Concept of burying a Russia tzaddik next to a Russia, right? Or the concept of, for example, a Shomer Shabbos section in a cemetery, that you bury people who are more careful about halacha, not next to people who are less careful, because the people you are buried with has a certain amount of significance. I'm not saying it's that important or not important, but you see the case here that they're really going to great lengths that Rav Huna should be buried next to Rav Chia. There were cases come up where people, a tzaddik passed away, and someone managed to buy a plot next to him, and the psak is you can't bury him there because he's not a tzaddik. Another tzaddik who belongs there. These things come up later on through the ages, shalos and chuvas, because you see how much trouble they go through. You see how much trouble they go through to bury Eretz Yisrael. So the story is a kind of crazy story. And the story is not a halachic story. The story is about a case that happened. It's about Rav Huna. Rav Huna we know all around. Rav Chisda comes all around. So the embers of the story have a lot of significance in terms of halacha that's set up. Okay, so here they are. Who's going to bury him? So they say who's going to take him in? So man ma'ayale. Who's going to bring him in? So Amalei Rav Chana. Rav Chaga says, Anama Ailele, I'm going to bring him. I'll have the honor to take him in. Why me? Because I was able to clarify and get good Torah knowledge when I was only 18 years old. And I never saw a seminal emission. So I was pure, right, in terms of my Torah. And I did it when I was young. Umashmele kameh, and I served in front of him, I was his shamas to Rav Huna, v'yade bi'uvdei, and I knew what he did. So in other words, I actually studied with him. I studied when I was young. I didn't see a seminary mission, and I also took care of him. So I'm the guy who should really give him the last rites, so to speak, not literally last rites, to take him to his final resting place. And I'll tell you how much I know about him, and he gives you an example. The Yom Echad, one day, is Haficha le Ritzua the Tefillin. His Ritzua of Tefillin, the strap, turned over, V'yasiv le Arba Tanisa, and he sat 40 He sat 40 days of fasting because his Ritzua turned over. Okay? Doesn't mean that you have to do it. Okay? And if it does mean the Ritzua turned over, it probably doesn't mean over here, it probably means back here, the Ritzua around the head. We don't do this. What's the big deal about the Ritzua?
It's black and yellow.
Yeah, so it's black and gray. So what? But it's a Ritzua, it's a piece of leather. And the answer is, the Rishonim say that the Ritzua is tied together to form the name of Hashem. You have the Shin, and you have the Dalet, and you have the Yud.
And the straps are
not the straps that hang here. These are the leftover straps. But the Ritzua itself is a formation.
Yeah.
Right. This is the Dalet, single Dalet, double Dalet. This is the Shin, and the piece on the thing is the Yud, or the Yud is over here where it's tied around the BAYT.
You're saying the straps are turned around, or the Yud or the Dalet?
Means the strap. Okay, it means the strap here. Okay.
Oh, the one went around.
We don't know where. It doesn't say where the strap was. Here. But the Rishonim say it really does. It never meant that these parts are the straps that hang down, because that's just like leftovers. If it means anything, it means here, where it forms into the Dalet, or here, this part which forms to the Shin, the parts that are actively creating the divine name of Hashem. That's what he did. It doesn't mean that you do it, doesn't mean we do it. This is what a great kind of guy he was. He sat at Tainus for 40 days when this happened. By the way, some Rishonim say it doesn't even mean the Ritzuas, it means the Batim were turned upside down. I'm not sure how that happened. Okay, maybe like when he tightened it tightened the wrong way or something. So that makes a lot more sense. The Batim have greater Kedusha than the Ritzuas, whatever. But here's a guy, 40 days of not eating because the Ritzuas turned around. So, and I saw that because I was taking care of him. See, he's making his case why he should take him in. Okay, so he's the guy who's going to take him in. And here's where the story gets a little esoteric and a little like semi-Kabbalistic and hard to understand. So he takes him in. So he takes him into the crib. Havegana Yehuda mimine davuha v'chizkiah mismale. So Rabbi Chia is lying in the middle. Doesn't mean it could be his bones are lying, by the way. It doesn't have to be his body. And on the right side is Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Chia, and the left side is Chizkiah, the sons of Rabbi Chia. So the two sons are there to protect the father. So there's no empty spot. And what did they say? They're going to put Rav Huna next to Rav Chia, but the two sons of Rav Chia are lying next to him. So, and who could be the only person who sees this part of the story? Rav Chaga, who's taking him in. So, Amale Yehuda le Chizkiah. So the dead son of Rav Chia says to the other one, Yehuda, that says to the other one, and obviously Rav Chaga sees this, hears this, imagines this. He says to him, Kumi duchtech. Okay, you younger son of Rav Chia, you got to get up. You got to move over. Dlav orach ara the kohen Rav Huna bahadei. It's not proper that Rav Huna should be next to you. You got to move aside. So it's going to be me, Rav Chia, Rav Huna, and then you can lie there. We're going to squeeze another one in. So the two great scholars will be next to each other. Now, bahadei the kohen, when he gets up, who gets up? Chizkiah, the younger son, gets up. In this, I can't even imagine a story. Kambade amuda denura. So the big pillar of fire shoots up, because obviously when dead people start moving around, all kinds of things happen. So here's Chaga with the aron, the coffin of Rav Huna, and suddenly the bodies start moving around, the bones start clattering around, and this spiritual fire jumps up, a sign obviously of divine significance. So Chazir Rav Chaga, so Rav Chaga saw the divine, the fire. So Iboyis, he got very scared. He's going to get burnt. We're dealing here with high tension stuff. Zakfe le'arone v'nafa. He stands up the coffin and he leaves. Stands up the coffin to protect himself from the fire, and he goes out. V'hai lo ianesh anish mishum the zakve le'arone de Rav Huna. And the reason he didn't get burnt, or he didn't get caught, or he didn't get punished, because Rav Huna was in front of him, and and protected him from the fire itself. So he stood the coffin up in order to protect himself. Okay, and that's how the story really ends. So the story kind of leaves us a little flat, because you don't know what happened in the end. You kind of get, did it mean therefore the coffin remained standing ad hayom, or does it mean that they later went in to straighten out the coffin? And what does it mean to straighten out a coffin? And what kind of fire did he see? And what kind of movement was really going on? So none of that is really explained, and the Rishonim don't really explain this to us. But the key to the story is, once again, is not so much the last lines that are hard to understand what this means, which is probably meant to be symbolic at any rate. Right? Because anytime you're dealing here with moving around bodies and spirits and so forth, you get into kind of literature that's hard to often explain it. It's not so much to understand the last part of the story, but to rather understand everything until then. First of all, about cover to a mace, giving a spadim, taking to Eretz Yisrael, who you're buried next to, and so forth and so on. And that is the story of the burial of Rav Huna.